Okay, so this is the code breaker one. Let me get the instruction.
Can you please kill the frog light?
I can.
Thank you.
Good. Actually, I want to, yeah, let's do this first and then. So, first thing I want to bring up is the potential that your round button, so I think in my instructions I had said that the user interface package should have an uppercase I. Is everyone tracking that? So if you're getting an error, if you actually made it camel cased, the I for your user interface package is an uppercase I, you're going to have to go into round button and round corner button and change that I to match. Does that make sense? So it depends upon if you did all lowercase like mine is, or if you did camel case with
Is
an up.
yours lowercase like in the on web courses? The example?
Mm.
Oh,
Some people may have done uppercase.
just out of habit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whatever way you named your user interface package, just make sure the package statement in the round button and the round corner button matches.
Okay.
All right? Because otherwise you're going to get an error. It's going to say, I don't know what this package is.
I didn't see any errors, and then I changed it to uppercase and not errors.
So just look at the name of your package here.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, and in fact you can just copy it and go into round button and round corner button and paste it in. Just make sure it matches.
And like in line 22 through like the rest of it, I have errors now.
USB, flash drive,
Can I see it?
Yeah.
small one with the copy
Oh.
Just look up image, a free online OCR under the image text. Just look up image text.
Right? Copy.
So if you make it, it's just gonna be up.
Yeah. And then copy and paste.
I guess we can do that.
Oh, you want to do it easier on me.
Yeah. So remember how we church? Oh, so you have to do it on both of them?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, because, so,
And then right.
so round corner button you have to rename first because round button extends it.
Okay.
So if you rename round button first, it's gonna be mad because it can't find that. Yeah. All right, so if you look at round button, it actually extends rounded corner button. So make sure that the package name on rounded corner button is updated first and then rename it on round button because there's that dependency. So that was what she had, and once they were both updated, the errors went away. Go away. Hey, much better. Oops. Okay, okay. Oops. No, stop. You're seriously gonna act like that?
Yeah, I remember writing that.
It's coming up.
Is it? Oh, I see. Alright. Okay. So are we good with those two issues?
Yep.
Yes?
Yeah.
Alright. So. So here you're gonna create that class. And then we need these member variables. And they should. So you need to fix imports to get the classes in there. All right, so that's the member variables. Any questions about the member variables? So now two of the member variables are two JPanels. They need getters and setters. So if we highlight those, do a right click, refactor,
Getters and setters or just getters?
probably just getters. We don't need to set them. So we have the getters.
Does it matter if we do both?
No.
Okay.
Labels?
All right, so now I have those.
Oh, you mean like,
It's not where I'm.
Private class?
oh,
No, just private. Oh, private.
what do you say? She's like, oh.
Oh, and then you have to, you know how to go on
Oh, okay, I thought it was right.
All right, so the two getters and setters. We're good with those? All right, so now we need a constructor for our class. And we're gonna have to write a custom constructor because we need it to receive this parameter of CodeBreaker. And also we need to call method unit components. So your constructors are always the same name as your class. Has no return type. So just for development purposes, I just called this guy Breaker UI. You'll name it appropriately. And then I need to receive that parameter. I'm going to set my local member variable equal to the parameter I received. And I'm also going to call init components. So we'll have to write init components. And the method signature on init components, access level modifier should be private because nobody's going to call it besides within this class. We're not returning anything, so the return type is void and our parameter list is empty. So now we need to initialize all the components for our user interface. So both of our JPanels, we have to instantiate them and also set a minimum size and set preferred size and add a title border. So let's instantiate those JPanels. So they're instantiated. Now we need to set the size on them. So the method to set the size is the one that is actually going to definitely get acknowledged as the set preferred size. And it receives an argument of class dimension. And so we're just going to put in here new dimension. And then we want to pick a size. So on the code breaker attempt, the array is gonna be 10 long and 4 wide. And I think I did, like, on the width, I did like 100, and on the height, I did 200. This is one of those things where it's just trial and error, and you just have to try it and see what it looks like. So then I need to fix imports, because I need the class dimension added. So then I'm just gonna do the same thing for the colors. And the colors goes all the way across the bottom of the screen, so I did 200, but it's not really tall, so I think I did 60 for the height.
What endpoints do you use to get the set preference size? Like, is there any endpoints you had to put in besides the JPanel?
Well, once you do this new dimension, you're going to have to right-click and get the dimension class as well. It is java.auth.dimension.
Okay, so, no, it's just the set preference size.
The set preferred size is part of class JPanel.
Okay, never mind.
So then I also like to set the minimum size as well. So usually what I do is I just copy the set preferred and then change it. Minimum.
Is Leon
Okay, so that's setting our sizes. So I set minimum size, set preferred size. So using the argument should be an instance of class dimension with a corresponding width and height. And then the last thing is to add a title border. So this is the method we're going to use. So I'm going to,
Yeah, I just changed some dark. I think it was in there. I have to look for it.
You got improved in this?
Yeah, once you're done with this one.
so because this comes from the class border factory, we'll have to do a fix imports on that as well. And then here in the double quotes, you want to add what the name of the panel actually is.
Quick question.
Yes?
Like, when you do imports, if you do like Java util star, so you don't have to fix imports for every line, is that like frowned upon or?
It depends upon who you ask. So if you do, like for example, import javax.swing.asterisk, you're going to get every single class that is in that package. If you're talking about resource management, people are going to be like, that's a terrible idea. So that's why I usually only import what I need to. Does it work anyways? Absolutely. So really it just depends upon who you ask, what the correct implementation is. Okay, so now we have the border set. So any questions about setting up the JPanels? Okay, so let's focus on the first JPanel here. So we have our code breaker attempt JPanel. So this is going to have a 10 by 4 array of buttons. So we want to set the layout manager on this one to grid layout so it makes everything perfectly sized in the space that we have established. So here I'm just going to add that layout. It doesn't matter where you put it. I just like to keep my stuff all organized. So here I'm going to set my layout is the method. I'm going to do a new grid layout. And I'm going to pass my 10 rows by my 4 columns. So again, we're going to have to fix imports to get the grid layout into our class. So we've set the layout manager. So now we need to instantiate this 2D array of these round buttons. So that is 10 rows by 4 columns. So that's one of our member variables, and it's up here. Oops, a temp. So attempts is an array of round buttons, and we said we want it to be 10 by 4. Normally I would say use the constants, but let's just be functional as fast as possible. So I've instantiated it. So now the next thing I need to do is put in a nested for loop to affect how the buttons actually display. So since we have a 2D array, we have to use a nested for loop. I always like to call my looping variables with their accessing rows and columns. Okay, so I've established my 2D array, my nested for loop. So once we have that set up, the 3 things we want to do in here. So first of all, we need to instantiate an instance of our class round button. So what we can do is reference our 2D array, reference the current row column looping variable, and set it equal to a new round button. Your other option would be to instantiate it separately and then you would have to explicitly set it in the 2D array. Does that make sense? So there's 2 different ways you can set that up. I chose this implementation because it's less code. Any questions about that part? So the next thing we need to do is determine if we're in the bottom row. Because when we add these buttons to our user interface, when we do a dot add on the J panel, it starts here at row column 00. But when you actually interact and play the game, you start down here. So we want to disable all of these buttons because the first attempt should be down here. So we make sure that our user interface is helps prevent errors for the user. So my logic was asking if so if my row is not my max row, then I'm going to disable this button. And the method is set enabled, and you pass a false. Does anybody care if I delete this? 2 lines of code?
No, you're good.
Oh, yeah, you did that.
So the last thing I need to do is actually add this button to my JPanel. So my JPanel is called CodeBreaker Attempt.
Is that inside the if statement?
It is after the if statement.
Are the curly braces missing from that?
Yeah.
I don't see 'em.
I don't have curly. So when it comes to any type of logic statements in any programming language, if you only have one executable line of code, you do not have to have open-close curly braces if they're not required.
Okay.
But if it makes you feel better, I think.
That looks better.
Sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I need to actually add this guy. So I'm going to add to it this button we just created. Hey, what are you doing? Yes.
So the way I did it is, instead of actually using that array, I just made a new round button and then added that straight into the JPanel in the loop. I didn't
Okay.
Actually, is that?
You need to add it to the array as well.
Will we use it later in the project?
Yes, it's important that it is part of the array itself,
Okay,
because we're going to be using logic on the array, not the JPanel.
that makes
Because
sense.
the data associated with the button is in the 2D array of the round buttons. It's not, the JPanel just represents the state.
Right.
We don't actually, it doesn't do anything,
Okay.
okay?
Gotcha.
So it definitely needs to be in that 2D array.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so I'll just make that.
So any questions about that part?
So you need to remove like you did and get the thing.
Can I move on, or are you waiting? Are we still typing?
It's
Okay.
only because but we will use this array.
Okay, so now we have the CodeBreaker JPanel, CodeBreaker Colors JPanel. So this one here is also an array of round button, but it's just a single 1D array. So we need to instantiate that guy. So let's go up and grab him. And should use a constants, but we'll just do the 8. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . good with that? So the next thing we need to do is declare this local variable data type as an index that we need to use. So that's just an int whenever we use indexes into an array. So I just called mine IDX and initialize it to 0. The purpose of this index is to access the array list of colors in our constants.java file. So then after that, we're going to use an enhanced for loop that loops through our 1D array. And the data type stored in that 1D array is class round button. For each button that's in there, I'm just going to use a variable called b to access it, and the collection name of those round buttons is buttons. Yes,
Is it okay if we use a normal for loop for this?
absolutely.
Okay.
I just try to get people exposed to different options that are available in object-oriented programming. All right, so let's get all of the functionality that we need to add. So the first thing we need to do is instantiate this instance of the round button. So my variable name is b, and it's going to be a new round button. The second thing we need to do is instantiate an instance of class color. We're going to set it equal to the color in our constants array that is located at this index. So obviously the first time through, we look at this, here's our colors. So we do index 0 is blue, 1 is black, 2 is orange, white, yellow, red, green, pink. Doesn't have to be in that order, but we're just using an index to actually get it. So because I'm going to fetch a color, I need the class color, and I set that equal to our constants dot, I need to import this guy. Sometimes you have to manually type your import statements. So the array name is code colors, and I want to use a dot get, and I'm getting the first one at index 0. And then I need to fix imports to make sure you're importing java.auth color, because there are 2 other options. We are just using the one from the Windows toolkit. Okay, so then the next thing is we need to set the background color of the round button instance to the color in step 2. So I have my button here. And to set the background color, notice that it is method set background and it takes an argument of color. So we're going to use that one, and beautiful IDE automatically populated the color for me. Any questions about that? So the next thing is, because it's just a J button, that it really has no idea about this color that its background is. So to make it easier for us, then what we want to do is use this option to put a client property. So client properties are those custom properties we talked about that we can put on J components. And so the first argument is, what is the string text you're going to reference by this color? And then the second thing is what value you want associated. So it's like a key value pair. So when the button actually gets clicked on, I'm going to be able to go get that client property, passing color as the argument, and it'll give me back the color that that button is actually given. Questions about that?
Is there a multiple put client properties there or no? There's only
No, one at a time.
Okay, there's only one.
So the next thing we want to do is actually add a tooltip, and I'm just going to write one of them. You'll have to write the other 7, because when the user hovers over the button, we want them to know what color it is. And the reason why is because, let me find where this error is. So let me run this. So orange and yellow are really hard to distinguish, because they look really similar, right? Well, at least on my laptop it does. I guess it is more obvious up there. But also with the white, you want to know that that really is white and not something that's missing. And so what we're going to do is add a tooltip saying what that color is, so when the user hovers over it, it displays. So the method is set, you start typing tool, and notice that tooltip text. So the tooltip text we want to pass is dependent upon what color our button is. So you can either do an if-else statement or you can do a switch. So if I do a switch on this value of color, and if-else works just as well, it doesn't matter. So if the color is blue, maybe you're, yeah, no, you have to do an if-else on this one, sorry.
Professor,
Yes,
can you use the method toString on the color? Does that work?
I think the toString still just gives you the RGB code. It doesn't actually give you the color, because I've tried that before and it doesn't actually give you the words.
What if you know the position of each color in the elements if you use the int index instead for the switch case?
What if somebody goes back and changes the order of the colors? Yeah. So in theory, your implementation would work, but if the order of the colors ends up getting changed, then it's no longer accurate. The switch doesn't work. I tried it, when I did a case color dot blue,
Oh, okay.
it said no.
Yes, okay.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Probably outside the scope of this, but would enum then maybe work better as a data type because you could actually.
Enum would be fabulous, actually. That would work with no issues whatsoever. So there are, one of the things we talked about with switch statements is there are some limitations of what you can do with them. And obviously, color dot whatever, it says absolutely not, you can't do that. And so that's just trial and error and experience. Yes?
I did color to string and switched that way, and then just used the RGB values for each color.
That's okay.
For
You want to do
each
it that way.
piece.
Just know that the to string doesn't ever actually convert to The
Yeah,
text.
the actual text,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
And then
still
I just
gonna be
did the
RGB
tooltip based
code.
on whatever color that was.
Yeah. However you accomplish it, as long as it works, that's cool. Yes?
Is it safe to use the equal equals there, or should you use like
That's a good question. Either one would work. So it's just personal preference. So that's one of the things, especially with UI development, there's always, lots of times there's multiple ways to accomplish the same thing. So it just depends upon which one you choose.
You said we'll have to do that with all the colors.
Yeah, we'll have to do all, just else if for the other 7.
Okay.
So that makes sense how to set the tooltip on the buttons? Okay, so then the next thing we need to do is actually add that round button to the JPanel. And our JPanel is called Codebreaker Colors. Do a dot add and add the button. So because we're using Flow Layout as our layout manager, it's just going to add them in the order of whatever color you end up doing first. And the order that, basically whatever order they're in your array list. So then the last thing we have to do is actually increment our index so that we get 8 unique colors versus 8 of the same color. Now, one of the things somebody came to office hours about is how the buttons actually displayed in the code colors panel, that they were too big. And so you may have to do a set preferred size on the button if they do come back too large. And I think I went maybe 30-30 will fit, because the height of the JPanel for this is 60. So 30-30 would definitely be smaller than 60. Basically, what you're looking for is the height of the button is smaller than the height of the panel. So you might have to do this. When I generated my UI, I did not have to set the size on my buttons. Yes?
In your first for loop, you made the attempt array equal to the button you created, and for this loop you haven't done that. So I was wondering if it was necessary or if it made a difference.
Oh, that other implementation I was showing you?
Hers does not.
The OR?
Yeah, in the first for loop you set attempt, no, for in every the attempt equals.
So this is the actual button. Okay? So what we've created here is, we've said we have this 2D array. And at every position, there needs to be a round button there. So I'm referencing each position of my 2D array, and I'm saying instantiate an instance of class round button. And so that's how it's getting established there. Does that make sense? So like I said, okay, I have this container, and the only thing you can put in it is round buttons. So now let's look at each row, column, position, each element of my container, and let's put a round button in there. Okay? Does that make sense what we did there?
Yeah, I understand what you did on
Okay.
that loop.
And so now let's talk about this one.
Okay.
So here, instead of using a traditional for loop, I'm just using an enhanced for loop. Because I already said this is a 1D array of round buttons, and there's 8 of them. So with enhanced for loops, the very first time I access this, it really is accessing index 0. And then the second time it goes to index 1. And then it goes all the way down to index 7. So it says, basically what this is saying, this is just a shortcut. If we had a traditional for loop, this code on line 86 is doing exactly the same thing with the 3 lines of code with the for loop, well actually 2, because it's just a single line of code. So we don't have to open close curly braces. But, so those 4 lines of code are replaced with this one.
Okay.
So that's what the enhanced for loop does for you. It starts at index 0.
You can do that on the second loop because it's only one dimensional.
Yes, you cannot use an enhanced for loop on a 2D, a multi-dimensional array. It doesn't understand it.
Okay.
But on a 1D array, you can use an enhanced for loop.
Could you do a for loop first and then do a smaller enhanced for loop within that? And
You
that's-
cannot nest enhanced for loops. It doesn't work.
Okay. Okay. Just curious.
Okay, so does this make sense? That these 2 implementations are the same. It's just line 87 is shorter.
For the secret code UI, when you add the images and then the check button, since it's flow layout, it puts them both in the middle. And then your example, in the Word document, they're like spaced out.
And I'll show you how to do
I
that.
fixed it, but I was just.
What do you mean you fixed it?
I set that top panel to border layout and then put 2 temp panels and then added this because it's naturally flow layout, so it adds them to the middle.
Hmm.
Then I just put one to the west and one to the east.
So my ghetto implementation was I just created an empty J label and stuck it in between
Yeah.
the
Okay.
4 images and then the check.
Okay.
Yeah.
But is my implementation
As long as it appears the way you
Yeah.
want it, does not matter.
the same?
And I like that you're trying.
Yeah.
And you're looking for alternative. You're like, it doesn't look the way I want.
Yeah.
How can I fix this? So there's different ways to accomplish that. I use the ghetto version and just put an empty J label in there because you can't see it.
It was probably a lot less good than mine.
Eh, but you learned something.
I did learn something.
Okay. So any questions about this panel? Yes?
For something like what he was talking about, to get full points, do we have to have that space?
No,
Oh,
not at all.
so it's just like a cosmetic thing?
It is.
Okay, gotcha.
Anything else? Yes, sir.
If you use a primitive data type, the enhanced for loop, you get pass by value, and it doesn't really change the array value. So if you have like array events, I think I played with it a little bit. I think I found that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Because the thing about objects is if you're modifying them,
It's a pointer.
you're modifying them.
Yeah, because you get a pointer with the object,
Yeah.
but with a primitive, you
Yeah.
end up getting passing by value.
Yes.
So enhanced loop is doing something functional.
Oh, I see.
Okay. So we did all that. So there's your CodeBreaker UI. So how do we actually make this show up on our Mastermind UI? So the first thing is you have to instantiate it, and you also have to pass as an argument the core class that supports it. So in our Mastermind class, we're receiving as a parameter in our constructor the game that was instantiated in our main. And so we need to set it here locally so that we can pass the back end of each one of the classes from our core package to its associated UI. And so in order to get to my CodeBreaker from class game, we have that getter in there already. So I would do game.getCodeBreaker and pass that to the constructor, because our constructors are expecting its associated core that the UI is built on. So here I'm expecting in my constructor, my CodeBreaker, well, you have to pass it in Mastermind UI. The way to get it from game is using its getter. So if you go back to game, here we have CodeBreaker, CodeMaker. We instantiate them. And then down here, we set up the getters and setters for it so that we can access them. So that's how you get those components passed to their those core classes passed to their associated UI. Does that make sense? How we get there? So the other thing with Mastermind UI that you need to realize is that we are using the default border layout. So when you are adding those components, those UIs, those JPanels to Frame, you must specify what area, one of those 5 areas that we have available to us in JFrame using border layout, where do you want it to go? If you eliminate the second argument, border layout south, border layout center, border layout north, border layout east, if you eliminate that second argument, all 4 of your JPanels are going to layer right on top of each other, and you're only going to see the last one that you added. So don't forget that you have to specify where you want it to go. Now the thing with border layout, so here, when you're putting so the north is, or the page start, that's where the secret code goes. The south, or page end, is where the code colors go for the code breaker. And then we have the middle for the code breaker attempt and the code maker's response. So when you're choosing line start, center, and line end to add those other 2 JPanels, you need to choose 2 that are side by side. So it either needs to be line start and center, or center and line end. Because by default, what border layout is going to do, it is going to allocate space for that center, even if you only put a JPanel in the line start and a J panel in the line end. You'll get this hokey little space in the middle. And you'll be like, I don't understand why it's doing this. It's got to be side by side, so pick 2 of them. Otherwise you get a strange look and feel when it's done. And you can still use the older versions from the north, south, east, west, center. I like the cardinal ones because they make more sense to me, but they're both valid. So one of the other things, so if you can do CodeBreaker UI, CodeMaker UI is so similar, it's scary. The only difference is the class of the components, so they're J labels instead of J buttons. And the only other difference is adding that image. So I provided this source code in the document itself for the assignment. You don't have to use it if you don't get a strange output, but I found that I get a consistent look of images on components when I use this. But you're not required to, it's just an option. So remember that when we are, where's my question? So we're using the class image icon, so I have that code example attached to the assignment on how to use image icons. So it's basically a copy, paste, modify, with the exception of to make this actually compatible with Mac. You're really going to want to add this in here. So this is a better implementation because it will definitely work with your Mac. Whereas with Windows, just the string version works beautifully, but on a Mac it does not. Sting? Oh, if you do a string. Okay. So we talked about on Monday relative pathing versus absolute. So relative to the location of where CodeMaker UI lives, where is this image itself? So I asked you to create a package called images, because again, we like to package together common functionality. So if we added more images to this UI, we would add another image to this folder. And then here I have the question mark.
Could you show how you got that in there?
There's two different ways you can do it. You can either do it directly from the hard drive, or you can actually drag and drop it. So if you minimize your UI, your editor, So let me Control C. Did you go? You didn't go. Okay, so you can either go to the folder from your file browser and drag it in there, or you can, notice I hover and it's highlighting the folder,
Mm-hmm.
the package. Can you see that? You can drop it like that, usually.
Okay.
You could copy.
I had to drop it like in the folder itself, not like that.
I had a copy and pasted.
Yeah, I had to copy.
Yeah, I copied and pasted.
Actually,
It's alright.
Either way, it will drag, as long as you have the images package highlighted when you hover over it, it will drop it in there. But either way, so either from the hard drive or you can drop it straight into the editor. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I tried the same thing.
Would you have to reload NetBeans, or does it update automatically?
If it's in there, it should just automatically refresh
Yeah.
and display.
I checked that. I even capitalized the C too.
Oh, there it is.
So the difference between the way that we set the color on a label and doing the icon is just the method set icon. And I believe that is in the instructions. It explicitly tells you to call method set icon. Yep, right there. So are there questions about Mastermind UI?
Oh.
The inner classes, we had to do the inner classes for.
Yes, let's talk about those. That's a great question.
Oh, like right here.
Okay, so first of all, when you create an action listener, it is an inner class. So notice that when I click on the closed curly brace on line 141, it shows the associated open curly brace that starts on line 26. So these inner classes have to be inside of the overall class Mastermind UI. Track it on that? So the next thing is yes, we're creating a class, but we don't need it to be public because nobody's going to use this class outside of Mastermind UI. So we make it private to make sure it can't get accessed outside of the class accidentally. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. So let me comment this out. I want you to see the experience. And Anson had this experience during office hours. So even if I type public void action performed, action event, oh, see, that makes a liar out of me. Okay. So what happens is, even if you type this manually, lots of times you will still see this. And it says, you didn't implement action performed. What the hell are you doing? So let the editor make it for you. This is one of the few places I have found, and Eclipse does not do the same thing. Eclipse is totally cool if you're typing it yourself. Let the editor do it for you. Do the insert code, do the implement method, action perform, generate, and then fill in your code here.
I can do that again?
Yes. So it's yelling at you. You're missing something. insert code. One of your options is implement method. The only one we have to implement, action performed, click generate, and it sets it up there for you. And then get rid of the exception and replace it with your code. So once you have that action listener, the other thing that you have to do is you have to register it to the associated object. So right now, the only thing we have action listeners for is our menu items, and it's only 3 of our menu items. So to register an action listener, you reference the object, in this case, the rules menu item. You call method add action listener, and you pass the object of the action listener. So there's 2 different ways you can do this. And you'll see that when we implement the action listener for the buttons on the code breaker attempt, we'll use a different implementation. So you can do one of 2 ways. You can just pass the constructor with the keyword new, or you can instantiate an instance of that action listener and pass it the object reference as the action listener instead. So how do you choose which implementation? So for our menu items, there's only one instantiation of that action listener, because the rules listener is only going to get referenced once. The about listener is only going to get referenced once. The exit listener only gets referenced once. So from a memory perspective, from being efficient, it's only getting instantiated once. So it makes sense to pass it as an argument, such as line 91. Now, when we go to create that action listener for those round buttons, and for the color buttons, a better implementation is line 88, 89. Because for the color buttons, there's 8 of them. We probably don't want to use that memory 8 times to do the same thing. So we would instantiate it once, and then the logic of what happens goes into the action listener. Now, if we look at the codebreaker attempt, there's 40 of them. So maybe 8 isn't that big of a deal, but 40 starts to be more of a big deal. So we don't want to allocate that memory 40 times. We just do it once, and we apply it to all of the buttons, because they're all going to do the same thing. So for this implementation, this is probably a more accurate implementation. I'm not saying the other one is wrong. It just doesn't make sense if you're only going to use it once. But if you're going to use it multiple times, like we do for the next iteration of this assignment, only instantiate it, make it its own objects reference, and then just keep applying it to each one of the buttons to save the memory and be efficient. Does that make sense? Now, one of the other things, when you're building your menu system, you need to make sure you instantiate the objects before you try to add them. So one of the most common things that I see when people haven't built a menu before is that they don't instantiate it in the right order. So you want to instantiate your menu bar, instantiate your game menu, instantiate the menu items, and then you start adding them. So notice that I instantiate everything first, and then I add all of the items, the JMenu items to the menu, JMenu items to the menu, and then I finally add the menus to the menu bar. So you want to make sure you instantiate them before you try to add them to the menu system. Otherwise, you get a null pointer exception if they're not in the right order. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions or concerns? Besides debugging.
Could you scroll through quickly, Mastermind UI, please?
Bear with me. So you have the game, you have the CodeBreaker UI, CodeMaker UI, the JFrame, and then everything for your menuing system. So you have to set up your JFrame first. Well, set up your constructor first. Make sure you're getting that reference to the game, and then call your init components. I usually split up my init components. I always put my menuing system in its own method. So here I have my init menu bar in its own method. And then here's my two JCandles, my two UIs for the other two classes. Set up my JFrame, initialize the menu bar, and add everything to the JFrame. So that pretty much should cover everything. So now we're kind of down to individual debugging for people that are close but no cigar. So if you want to do that, we can do that next.